I am 89 years old, and I wasted 20 of them, not the way young people waste a Saturday sleeping in. I lived inside those years, got up every morning, did the work, provided for my family, and still managed to miss most of what mattered. I was present for all of it, and somehow absent from the parts that counted. I am going to tell you the 7 things I got wrong. Not as a man who figured it out quickly and is standing here to teach you something. As a man who got it wrong for a long time and who finally got it right. If you are somewhere between 60 and 85 years old, I believe you will recognize every single one of these, and I hope you still have time to do something about them. I believe you do. My name is Harold James Callahan. I am 89 years old. I was born in 1937 in a small town in rural Georgia. I cook my own meals every single day. I walk 2 miles every morning before the neighborhood wakes up. I tend my own garden. I live alone and nobody is hovering over me. I sleep through the night. I have never needed a nursing home, and I have outlived 3 of my doctors. I hold no medical degrees. What I hold is 89 years inside this body, and that may be the only credential that actually matters for what I am about to share. Before I go any further, drop your first name and your age in the comments right now. I read every single one, and knowing you are there makes this worth saying. Because these regrets are not easy for me to talk about, I kept them close for a long time. But I have come to understand that holding them in silence does not help me, and it certainly does not help you. Now I want to tell you what wasting 20 years actually feels like, because it does not feel the way you might expect. You do not wake up one morning and realize all at once that you have been doing it wrong. It does not arrive like that. It arrives slowly, the way water finds its way into the foundation of an old house. By the time you notice it, it has already been there for years. For me, it started around the time I turned 65. On paper, that should have been the beginning of something good. I had retired after 40 years. My wife, Margaret, was still with me. My children were grown and healthy. By every measure the world uses to decide whether a man has done well, I had done well. And yet, there was something hollow sitting at the center of those days. Not sadness exactly, not grief. Something closer to absence. I would sit in my good chair after supper and feel nothing arriving, like a room where the furniture had been removed and nobody could explain why. The walls were still there, the windows, the floor, but something that should have been filling that space was gone. I told myself I was tired. 40 years of hard work deserves quiet. This was what rest felt like, but rest does not feel like that. Rest is quiet and full at the same time. What I was feeling was quiet and empty. There is a real difference between those 2 states, and I could not have named it then, but I can name it now. I filled the hours the way men of my generation do when they do not know what to do with themselves. Television programs I did not care about. Long drives I did not need to take. Lunches with people I had run out of things to say to. All of it motion, none of it direction. What I did not understand yet was that I was running from things that required me to sit still and face them. The 7 regrets I am about to share did not come from doing terrible things. They came from not doing the right ones, from choosing the comfortable path when the important one was harder, from staying silent when I should have spoken, from waiting when I should have already moved. Stay with me, because the first regret is the one I believe most of you are carrying right now, even if you have never said it out loud. I spent years talking to a doctor who was a decent and careful man. When I described that hollow feeling, he looked at me kindly and said, "Harold, at your age this is quite common. We can manage it." He wrote me a prescription. I took it for 8 months. It smoothed things the way a plane smooths rough wood. Took the texture away, along with the trouble. Less hollow, yes, but also less of what I actually wanted to feel. I was not willing to accept that. I had seen where that road ended. I had watched men settle into the daily management of a life, instead of the living of one. Chairs and prescriptions and waiting. That was not where I was going. I decided, quietly and without telling anyone, to find out what I had actually gotten wrong. Not what my chemistry was doing wrong, what I had done wrong. The choices, the patterns, the things I kept repeating because I had always done them that way. I met a man named Roy at a former coworker's funeral. We had worked together at the mill 30 years before. I barely recognized him. He was 82 years old, and I want to be honest, he looked better than most men I knew at 65. Not healthier in the way doctors measure. Lighter. The way a man looks when he has put something heavy down and decided not to pick it back up. After the service, we sat outside and talked for 2 hours. I asked him what he was carrying these days. He said, "Nothing I don't choose to carry." That sentence stayed with me for the rest of the week. I called him on Saturday. I told him what I had been feeling, the hollow, the motion without direction, the sense that I had been present for my life but not really inside it. He listened without interrupting, without offering solutions I had not asked for. Then he said, "Harold, I know exactly what that is. I spent 40 years building it too." And that began the only real conversation I had that year. It led me, slowly and painfully, to these 7 things. So here they are. I am going to tell you the wrong way I did each one first because you deserve to hear the mistake before you hear the lesson. Regret 1. I held a grudge for 12 years when I could have let it go in an afternoon. My brother Thomas and I stopped speaking in 1987. If you ask me what started it, I would have to think hard. Something about our mother's estate, something about a word said at the wrong moment. The details have faded. The wall between us stayed solid for more than a decade. The wrong way most people hold a grudge is to believe they are punishing the other person by doing it. I told myself Thomas felt my silence, that it mattered to him the way it mattered to me. It probably did not. What it definitely did was live inside my chest every day, turning over and over. The right way is to understand that forgiveness is not something you do for the other person. It is something you do for your own body. Forgiveness does not mean what happened was acceptable. It means you have decided to stop paying rent inside your own chest for something that is over. The researchers at Johns Hopkins have studied what carrying long-term resentment does to the body. Elevated blood pressure, disrupted sleep, chronic stress responses that wear the system down year after year. We know this. Most of us choose the grudge anyway. Thomas died in 2003. I called him in 2001 after Roy helped me understand what I was actually doing to myself. We talked for an hour and a half. We did not solve anything from 1987. We needed to hear each other's voices again. When I hung up that phone, something in my chest that I had forgotten was tight became loose. I had carried it so long I thought it was just how I was built. It was not. I had built it, and I could put it down. But what comes next surprised me even more because this next regret is not about something I did wrong. It is about something I failed to do at all. Regret 2. I worked when I should have been present. I want to tell you about a Sunday afternoon in October of 1973. Margaret had made a roast. Our boy was 8. Our girl was 6. They had built something in the backyard out of sticks and old rope, some kind of fort, and they wanted me to come see it before the light went. I was behind on a work report. I said after supper, I did not make it out to the backyard. The next morning the rain had knocked the fort down. My daughter cried at breakfast. I told her they could build a new one. They never did. The wrong way men of my generation provided was to believe that presence and provision meant the same thing. They do not. A paycheck is not a Sunday afternoon in October. A replacement fort is not the same as watching the first one get built. The right way is to understand that the report will always be there. The afternoon will not. Children remember the afternoons. The Harvard Study of Adult Development has followed the same group of people for over 80 years, one of the longest-running studies on human well-being that exists. What they found across all those decades was that the quality of a person's relationships was the strongest predictor of how well they aged. Not career, not income, not health metrics. The people who stayed connected lived longer. The people who isolated faded faster. I never got that Sunday back, but at 74 I started making different choices. I started saying yes to the afternoons. I started showing up to the forts while they were still standing. Now here is the part nobody talks about. And this one cost me the most. Regret 3. I did not say I love you enough, especially to Margaret. Men of my generation were not raised to speak those words freely. We were taught that love was a thing you showed through staying, through working, through the long discipline of being reliable. I still believe that. But I also believe it is not sufficient on its own. The wrong way men like me expressed love was to assume the other person already knew. Of course Margaret knew. 43 years of marriage. She knew. Maybe she did, but she would have liked to hear it more often. I know this because in the last year of her life, when the days got shorter, she told me, not as a complaint, as a quiet truth between two people who were running out of time, the right way is simply to say it, in the morning, when you leave the room. For no reason in the middle of an ordinary Tuesday, because ordinary Tuesdays are exactly when it matters most. The Mayo Clinic has published research on emotional expression within long-term relationships. The finding is clear. Verbal affirmation plays a role in relationship health that physical presence alone does not cover. The words carry something that action by itself cannot replace. I tell my children I love them every single time we speak. I do not let a phone call end without saying it. My granddaughter told me last month that nobody else in her life says it the way I do. That is not a small thing. That is everything. Stay with me, because the next regret is the one that shrank my life for 30 years without my ever noticing it happening. Regret 4. I let the fear of what other people thought decide what I did with my own life. There is a woodworking class one did not take in 1979. A poem I wrote in 1985 and burned because I thought it was foolish for a man my age. A dance floor at my nephew's wedding in 1991 that I stood beside for 4 hours instead of stepping onto, because I was afraid of what I would look like. The wrong way I carried this fear was to give it a respectable name. Common sense, dignity, staying in your lane. I told myself I was being reasonable. I was not being reasonable. I was afraid. The right way to understand this is to look at the people whose opinions you have been afraid of and ask yourself where they are now. Most of the men whose judgment I feared in 1979 are gone. Not one of them was thinking about me as carefully as I imagined. The American Psychological Association has published research on authenticity, on the difference between living in alignment with your actual values versus performing a version of yourself for people who are barely watching. The consistent finding is that people who live more authentically report higher well-being, lower anxiety, and stronger relationships. We are not designed to perform, we are designed to be. At 74, I took a woodworking class. I was the oldest person in the room by 30 years. I made a small table. It is uneven and the finish is not right. I am more proud of it than almost anything I produced in my entire working life. The relief of not caring what anyone thinks, I cannot describe that. You have to live it. But I can tell you it is available to you right now. Not when things settle. Right now. And this leads directly to the next regret. The other side of the same coin. Regret 5. I confused needing other people with being weak. When Margaret was in her final year, I did not tell anyone how frightened I was. I managed. I handled it. I kept the appointments and the appearance of a man who had everything under his own power, because I did not know how to be a man who did not. After she passed, I lived in that house for nearly 2 years without telling a single person how I was doing. My children called. I told them I was fine. I was not fine. The wrong way to be independent is to believe that independence means never letting anyone in. That is not independence. That is isolation wearing independence as a costume. The right way is to understand that asking for help, letting someone sit with you in the hard thing, is not weakness. It is trust. And trust, given to the right person, is one of the most strengthening things a human being can offer another. The National Institutes of Health has published research showing that social isolation carries health risks equivalent to smoking 15 cigarettes a day, not per week, per day. The body registers deep loneliness as a physical threat. Your nervous system does not know the difference between chosen isolation and dangerous isolation. It responds to both the same way. Roy came to see me that winter after Margaret died. He sat in my kitchen and said, "Harold, I can see you. Tell me how bad it actually is." I told him. For the first time in 2 years, I told someone the truth, and the next morning I got up and something had shifted. The house felt less like a container and more like a home again. Now I am going to tell you something I am not proud of, but I think you need to hear it. Regret 6. I spent years worrying about things that never happened. I lay awake at 3 in the morning, calculating catastrophes that were mostly imaginary. In 1968, I spent 6 months certain my business was going to collapse. It did not. In 1984, I was convinced one of my children was making a decision that would ruin his life. He is 60 years old now, and doing well. In 1999, I was certain my health was failing in ways the doctors had not caught. It was not. The wrong way most of us worry is to believe the worry is serving a purpose, that if we keep turning the problem over in the dark, we will find the answer the daylight missed. We will not. The worry at 3 in the morning is not solving anything. It is theft. It takes the hours that belong to the present and spends them on a future that rarely arrives the way we imagined. The right way is to learn the difference between a problem you can act on today and a fear you are feeding by giving it your attention. Act on the first, starve the second. Harvard Health has published research on the cumulative effects of chronic worry on the body. Elevated cortisol sustained over months and years contributes to inflammation, disrupted sleep, and cardiovascular strain. The worry does not just feel terrible, it costs the body something real. What I do now every morning before my walk is sit still for 10 minutes and ask myself one question: what is actually true today, not what might become true? What is true right now? Most mornings the answer is, I am here. The light is coming. That is enough to begin with. I saved the last one for the end, because I believe it is the one that costs the most. Regret 7. I waited for the right time. When the children are older, when I retire, when the mortgage is paid, when things settle down, when I feel ready. I said all of that, for decades, about things that mattered deeply to me, that I kept deferring to a future that was always just slightly beyond where I was standing. The wrong way most people wait is to believe the waiting is preparation, that they are getting ready for the right moment. They are not. They are practicing the habit of deferral, and that habit becomes permanent if you practice it long enough. The right way is to understand that the right time is not a destination you arrive at, it is a choice you make. Right now, with what you have, in the life that is actually in front of you. Palliative care nurses, the people who sit with men and women in their final hours and simply listen, document the same finding again and again. People do not regret the risks they took. They regret the ones they did not the things they tried and failed at, the things they never started. I began writing at 80. I had wanted to write since I was 30. I told myself for 50 years that I was not ready, that the right season was coming. At 80, I finally understood that the season was not coming. I had to make it myself. I wrote letters to my grandchildren about my life, about my father and his hands and the way he smelled like pine resin on winter afternoons, about Margaret and the first time I saw her at a church supper in 1959 and could not think of a single intelligent thing to say, about things I had kept in silence for 50 years. Those letters are the most important things I have ever made, more than anything I built at work, more than anything I accumulated. I wish I had started at 30. I am grateful beyond words that I started at all. Now I need to stop for a moment, because I want to tell you something I believe is more important than all 7 of those regrets combined. Everything I shared with you today, the grudge, the missed afternoons, the unspoken love, the fear of judgment, the isolation, the worry, the waiting, all of it is really about one thing, and it is not a routine. It is not a practice. I have heard people say that what keeps older men and women alive and well is exercise and diet and sleep. That may be 30% of the picture, no more than that. The other 70%, the part that does not get talked about the way it should, is purpose. It is the feeling of being needed, of mattering to someone, of having a reason to rise that is larger than your own comfort. When Margaret died, I did everything right by the physical measures. I walked, I ate well, I slept, and I was fading anyway, not in my body, somewhere deeper than the body. I could feel it. The hollow I described at the beginning, that absence sitting at the center of my days, came back after she was gone, and it came back with real authority. A great deal of my purpose had been organized around her, around being her husband, her companion, her person. When she left, the scaffolding came down. What brought me back was not a supplement or a new prescription. It was a Tuesday morning in the winter of 2011 when I walked to my neighbor Ruth's house. She is 84 and lives alone, and I knocked and said, "Ruth, I am going to bring you breakfast this morning." She opened the door and she cried, not because of the eggs, because someone had knocked. That was the morning I got up without asking myself why I was bothering. And that is not a small thing. That is everything. I tend my garden now partly because I love the work and partly because Ruth's grandchildren come by on Saturday mornings to help me water it, and they have started asking questions about what things are and how they grow. I read every morning with the specific intention of having something worth telling. I write those letters to my grandchildren because writing them gives me somewhere to be every morning that matters to someone besides myself. Purpose is not something that happens to you. It is something you build deliberately from whatever materials your particular life has placed in your hands. Roy told me that in my kitchen the winter after Margaret passed. He said, "Harold, you have to decide that you are still useful, not because anyone is requiring you to, because you are the one who needs you to." I decided, and I have not looked back once. Friends, if you have stayed with me this long, I am grateful for you. Share this with someone whose mornings start with that hollow feeling, someone who has been going through the motions and knows it. They deserve to hear this. Leave your first name and your age in the comments below. I read every single one, and tell me one person you are going to reach out to today, not tomorrow, today. Write their name in the comments if you are willing. I want to see it. We are not done talking yet. This is my personal experience after 89 years of living. Always speak with your doctor before making any changes to your health or daily routine. I am not a doctor. I am a man who has lived a long time and made more mistakes than most. Take what is useful to you, leave what is not.